Good morning. I know I'm the last thing between you and lunch and maybe getting a flight home, so I appreciate your time today. So what I'd like to do is just tell you about a story that, as Joe said, that my team went through at Intuit, where we were working on some products for small businesses. And really, the story is what we want to say is that we started out trying to focus on our customers' lives, and in this case, again, they were the small businesses, but by the end of the experience, we had actually changed the way we worked. And so I hope that this will provide some insights and some learnings for you so that you can take them back and maybe start on Monday. So the premise is really that we were being asked to do something for a CEO. We were working on a complex product. We had something on a smartphone. We were starting to work on our mobile payments app, and that had already been released. We also had a tablet version that was out in the world, and we wanted people to be able to track this information that they were doing when they were taking a mobile payment and see it recorded in QuickBooks, which is the accounting software that Intuit makes. This all sounded really good, except in terms of what we were doing, it was very complex because most of the things really didn't talk to each other that well. We were unfortunately, we were in silos. The team that ran the web thing was in a different building usually. The mobile group was in a different group. And so the CEO actually wanted us to present an interactive demo that would really explain how we were doing all these things and really starting to address the customer's needs and to put this all together. And that sounded certainly reasonable enough, and I could see why he wanted to see that. But the one big constraint that he asked us to do was not to use PowerPoint. And so that's what the project leaders were saying. They didn't want us to use PowerPoint, and this actually intimidated some of us when we started out. So this is just really just to set the scene. And I really also what I want to do is say I'm very much like everybody else. I'm a user researcher. We do a lot of interviews with customers. We do pain points. We do different things. And we'd already done things like this. As Whitney said, we'd interviewed our customers. We were starting to create personas. And our goal, as Whitney said, the personas are really just to help connect you to your end users so that you can have that voice in the room. And really, I'm just showing you these things because we kind of had virtual attributes. We had a persona, again, someone who is going to be using some type of a tablet, probably in a brick and mortar store, a physical store, not at a craft fair. A lot of people were starting to use these at craft fairs, and it wasn't a restaurant. That's what was sort of on the other side. And these are just some of the artifacts that we had. And this is, again, one of the things that we did when we got started, again, because we were UX people and I was starting to partner with a product manager and other marketing people, we went to the whiteboards like everybody does. And, once we moved from our beautiful artifacts, or at least we joked that they were beautiful, we were saying, okay, well, we could have, we have this big strategy here, and maybe, we bring in the pain points, and I was already starting to write the problem statements that we've all been told to do. Well, they're having this issue and they do this and they feel frustrated because they can't get their information, or someone else, maybe one of the employees, logged the inventory one day or something and the store owner doesn't know about it. And then we had this crazy idea that we would, because we couldn't use PowerPoint, that we would do role playing. And we were not going to do just role playing. We actually decided we would create a script, and maybe we would bring the CEO into this script. And our CEO's name is Brad, so we wrote Brad into the script, and we had our technical writer writing it, and it was getting complex. We were seriously trying to write formal scripts. We were thinking we were going to have a real customer again, because we were so worried about not using PowerPoint, we weren't going to be able to have our visuals. What were we going to do? So we were doing this, and honestly, we were really starting to churn a lot. And I met with the group manager, and I said, look, I don't know where this is going. I know we've done a lot of work. We know this, but this is not going anywhere. And his advice to me was to set up the hardware. So I took that advice. I brought back this information to the team, and this is where I really think this was the first pivot point, where to really understand our customer, we started to create the customer shoes. And so what luckily, we were assigned a war room, and this is really a regular office, just like you probably have in your corporations or businesses. And what we wanted to do is we actually had some desks, and luckily the desks were movable. We raised the desks up, and we started to create some counters. And again, because we were starting to do things that related to cash registers and different things like that, we brought in like barcode scanners and we brought in a receipt printer, and this is an actual cash drawer, and we started to set up our tablet app as best we could to really reflect the store environment that we could. And you could see very much that there's still a whiteboard there, and we couldn't touch the other things. But this was starting to make it real. Then we had to set up the back office for our customer, because we knew that she actually, in our mind, she was going to be checking her books. She would use a Mac, and then maybe she would have to plug it in to this monitor, and then she would see any of the information, any of the sales that she got. They would then appear on the monitor. So we actually had to set up a virtual space for her to work. And in our mind, our persona was also, she was offering these design services and this home goods store. So think of a small pottery barn where you could go in and you could buy a pillow, but maybe she'll also do your living room or something. So we brought in colored pencils, and we brought in catalogs, and we went to Restoration Hardware, and we did site visits just to see what does a real store look like. And by then, we started to do other things, and we brought in inventory. We brought in, again, like baskets and some bowls and some different things, and frames. We brought in a bunch of frames because they were easy to get. And we started to also put some things on the walls. We started to put up poster-like things to really replicate this inventory. And so we were really starting to get a store going. But one of the other pivot points was that we didn't have a name. And like a real store, because we were going to, for various reasons, we would need a name, but we actually created some of the branding. We called it Helen's Habitats. And once we had that, we started to put that up. We needed to actually put it on the receipt. And we even created some brochures, because, again, we were trying to make this to be very realistic. And so we put the brochures out, and we had our branding. And so we were very excited about that, because the teams actually started to refer to it by name eventually once we started to brand it. So again, I think this is one of those tricks, is that you don't just name your persona, you could even name the immersive experience for the persona. So we were pretty much ready for business, and the group manager was happier with us, and people were excited about it. People started coming in, and this is basically, again, it was just a regular office. But we really got to our next pivot point was really to determine, like, okay, this makes sense to us, and it's based on the research, but what are real customers going to think? And so that was the next big step. So we went out and we found target customers who met our virtual persona, and we found people who owned small businesses, people who owned things like hair salons. This is someone who owned a hair salon, and we had them not bring their real inventory, because we know that when you're doing a lot of user research, sometimes they're like, your data doesn't make sense. What we're looking at doesn't make sense. And so what we had is, you're looking at some shampoo bottles, and there's different prices on the shampoo bottles. One of these says 24. I think this says 23, like 92 or something. And prices actually mean different things. There's different sale items. There's different things, and those are signifiers for our retail owners. And so instead of us using not only fake prices, but even watching people start to use real inventory, it started to make it a lot more real to us than what we could have imagined. And then, and so we also, because we started to do usability testing, but the problem was we created this entire room. We couldn't just take the entire room to a lab, so we had to hack a usability lab. And we did this for two reasons. One is we wanted to record the sessions because there was a lot going on. And two, we had remote team members. We had people who were 2 hours away in Folsom, California. We had people in Boston who were across the country. And the other thing the challenge that we had is, usually if you've ever done a remote study, you can at least run, again, and also we were doing a lot of the things on the mobile apps. So we had to use AirPlay to run the mobile apps onto the computer. But we used the video chat through WebEx to actually show the person in the room and actually swiping the card or opening the cash drawer or doing, whatever else she had to do, logging the inventory and things like that. And this was so realistic and gave so much more information that our remote team members were very grateful for this. I mean, we were starting to get calls that said, like, can you make it louder? We can't hear. And it was so awesome to have that experience, where the biggest problem you had was the volume. I bring up this quote because one of the really exciting things also about this project is that many of us hadn't worked together. I hadn't worked with these developers and the engineers before, some of the designers. Many people hadn't worked together, and this started to bring people together. And in fact, this developer named Tim, he was one of the people that was 2 hours away, but he attended a lot of the sessions. And he was also doing this in the middle of, we were doing these prototypes and builds, so he was working really hard. But the biggest thing was he felt rewarded when he would hear the customers say they liked this or they didn't like that. And he was also so bought in that instead of me going back to them afterwards and saying, hey, they really struggled, he'd seen it on video. He knew if there was a problem with them swiping. He knew how long it was to wait, that there was no issue. And so it was awesome for him to be a part of this. And so this is, he loved hearing them say, when can I have it? And that was definitely a reward for all of us. And so the next thing was that we really needed to start to raise it up a level. And so we were starting to be in the space all the time. We were starting to, we were having daily meetings. And when we were having the daily meetings, we had to run through all the space. And by the way, Tim is the one in the corner there. So you can see we even had different hardware. So we had the one that we were using on our tablet, but we also brought in a Microsoft Surface tablet, and we brought in other barcode scanners, because what we were starting to do was to really create the immersive experience of the entire small business. So because we expanded not just our persona, who was Helen and owned this business, but we really got into what would the store be like, and could we test competitor products there as well. And just another note, people started to meet in the room. We had these daily meetings. They were mandatory, but people wanted to be in the room. Some people sometimes would just wander in and start to play with that. And so that was really huge for us to start to experience these things. But then the next step was to start to go through it ourselves. And what we realized is that it was enough, we were often seeing a customer who was doing some type of usability session. This is usually where they were. This is my colleague Duncan. He in our role-playing scenarios, he actually started out usually playing the employee, and I often wound up playing the customer. And so you can see I'm actually giving him my credit card. And this is a staged photo, but I show you this just to give you that experience of what it was like for us to suddenly start to do the role-playing. And what I think that we really learned is that normally we would have just created the persona for Helen, who owned the store, maybe for the employee, but we never would have created the other persona, the one for the customer. And that it really made everything a lot more real when I started to interact with Duncan. He would try to sell me something. I would have to sign for it on the screen, or we were definitely doing a lot of give and take. And this starts to get into maybe service design and other things, like would he have to turn the tablet? Would other things happen? What if I had to do a return? We started to add a lot of different scenarios to our very simple store, instead of it just being, hey, we're going to just go and sell you some inventory today. And as we were doing that, we also, once we started to do the live demos, it wasn't just for us. We actually had stakeholders who we were demoing, because they were not totally bought into this whole role-playing and what were they going to do. And there was this big CEO presentation that was hanging. So stakeholders and managers and different people started coming to see us. And so it was a great forcing feature for us, because when the stakeholders came, it essentially meant that we were opening up shop. And so one of the things that it put us into the situation of having to be ready. And I'm showing you this scenario, because if you remember, we'd already created a logo. We'd done all this great branding, but sometimes the logo did not always print. And every time we would set up, it was about an hour before these demos or in the morning. Sometimes the logo, the receipt would print like that. We'd have to go fix something. Sometimes we had to hard code my Amex card into the build, or do different things like that to make sure that we were telling the whole story. And so because we were starting to do this, we were starting to develop empathy. Well, what if this really happens in the real world? One day we were doing a demo for higher level managers, and Duncan was playing the employee again, and we got this major message, a failure message. Oh my God, what was going to happen? The charge failed. What do you do? This is in the middle of a live demo, and for me, this was the most priceless thing that could have happened, because this was actually the real error message. And we watched Duncan panic, and we had to take our swiper out, and he had to put it in again, and it was extremely real world. And eventually, similar things happened twice. But because it was so dramatic, and because it happened to him in front of managers, and it was a live demo, we had empathy for Duncan, we had empathy for our end customers, and the entire team. And so this really highlighted what we absolutely needed to fix and what was it really, really going to be like to be in our customers' shoes. So I'm really excited to say that after doing this for several, this was actually several weeks, Helen's Habitats moved to a bigger and better location. We were able to get a room that actually had real bookshelves. We got some different inventory. She had an actual glass door, not just the office door, and she actually got a real back office. So that was really exciting. And what that enabled us to do was to bring in more stakeholders and to start to really make them the customer. And when we did that, they really went through that experience of saying, oh, maybe I could pick something off the shelf. Maybe I could try to buy that. And when we presented this to them, and when we presented going through all of that, they were literally in our experience. And so we had their buy-in, and we also had their support. He wanted us to start to add track lighting or something different to the store. Someone else, one of our developer people, he brought in bags for us to use because he could see that, oh, we were buying things, and hey, you needed bags. We had a director who brought in some of the nicer materials in the back because she thought of us when she was out shopping over the weekend. I mean, for me, this was really unheard of in terms of other people bringing things into my project. And they were really, what this also signified is they were making it their own. Everybody, all the other stakeholders, it wasn't just the team, they invested in this and they started to contribute to that. But it really became bigger than the team story, it became the entire department. And that was really exciting for us. So what I wanted to say is that we really, we created essentially the customer's shoes. We put real customers in the customer's shoes, and then by eating our own dog food, we wound up with tons of empathy. The biggest thing was really the team empathy, but we also it increased morale for the team. We started to hear that all these team members, people were 2 hours away in Folsom. They were in Boston. They were calling into the sessions. They were starting to meet as much as they can. People were traveling more to be in the room. We got a permanent space. I mean, in a place where, time and budget is hard, we actually negotiated for a better room, not just this war room. And, it was priceless to have the stakeholder support. People started to do this on other projects. The payroll team wanted to do that. They were like, this is great, we need to present this. The usability lab started to change one of their rooms from being a lab setup to having a retail space, and so on. And we wound up just doing a lot more role play and other things. And so really, instead of this being about a one-time demo, we significantly improved our working lives so dramatically that nobody could imagine going back to the old way. So, and just really quick, we did this all for low budget. The props were $35. Some of the things were just, people donated items. We were using things, and we were using stock images just blown up. So all of this really cost under $100. So I think that it's definitely something that anybody could do, and I'd love to hear your stories if you try it. So thank you. Are there any questions? Hi.
What did the CEO say about it?
He called it the Wizard of Oz. He said it was like stepping in, and it was awesome. Thank you. So, any other questions? Oh, yes.
So I had a question about, you have all this great empathy, and it needs to turn into prioritization. How did you, were there discussions about, hey, this is a user story,
Right.
This is an enhancement, I mean, were there, I want to
Yeah.
see them fighting it out about, no, we're going to fix this bug.
So that definitely happened. We basically kept having to reprioritize the backlog, and so that was all happening. But the problem was that we were definitely doing all this research, this real-world research in real time, and the team kept building. But sometimes if we had people like Tim or we had the developer leader on the phone, things would get prioritized and things were getting tested a lot faster, and we didn't have to make the case as much. So we really elevated some things like that. So that was good. What I didn't show here was literally like the screens that we redesigned, but there were if you go and you load the iOS 7 iPad app now, you can see different screens than what were shown in this demo. And so thanks. Okay. Yes.
So when you look at that holistic experience, what are some of the things from the outside that might affect other areas
Right.
Sales or even support teams.
Oh, actually, I forgot to mention we brought in the person who is responsible for supporting this with the Apple Store and helping us to really tell the story. She wanted to bring it. She talked about bringing in Apple. I mean, we brought her through the whole experience. Although we didn't bring Apple in when we tried to pitch it, because she had been through our environment and because we were taking people like that in, she understood it. And actually, when we were doing our beta tests for support, we recorded it. We did some of the demos, and the people who were doing that said, can we keep the recording? And it made it so much easier for them to do that. And even and lastly, even when we were writing like with the cash store and what you had to do step by step, it was so easy to have this here that anyone could go in there and just keep playing with those steps, because again, it was connecting pieces of hardware, pieces of software, and things like that. So it was really helpful. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Oh yeah.
Did you get any pushback from people when you first started that were very resistant?
Yes, we got a lot of pushback because we were asking for them, how do we tell this story? People were starting to say, we were saying, okay, we have this persona, maybe we'll do a role-playing skit. They were starting to think it's going to be very comedic. They thought it was going to be like a school play. And so they were trying to tell us just don't do that, don't make us look bad and things like that, which is why we kind of shifted gears. We really focused on creating the space. And then once we created the space, it was easier to get buy-in to tell the story. And what eventually happened is, again, like Duncan and I were not supposed to be formally presenting. We were just really helping to articulate, hey, here are the pain points, here's how the hardware works. But because we started doing it so much, the stories naturally fell out of it, and then we developed that new role-playing scenario. So, okay. Yes?
How close was it to the development team to get them to actually meet in the space?
So we had a mandatory meeting, and the mandatory meeting kind of came from the group manager, and it was every day at 5 o'clock. But it was just, essentially, it was starting out as a war room. So that was just where the meeting was going to be. But what was so exciting is that as we kept doing this, they when I showed one of those pictures, they were just always there. Like, we were just in the space. So sorry, I can't skip forward. But because we were there, people stayed before. They came before the meeting. They came after the meeting and stayed. And honestly, my experience was it's the meetings after the meeting, outside of the official meetings, where you learned a lot, because we were constantly doing this. The stakeholders would come by. They would see how we were doing. Even what was interesting is with this one, I think with the stakeholders, this was after one of those demos. I mean, they were talking, some of them had come once or twice. Other people, they were starting to stay, and they were really trying to say, well, how does this fit into what we're doing in other parts of the business? And they were in our space, and I think that this is such a powerful lesson that, it's sort of like if you draw the picture of the problem, you own the problem. And look, they were in the space that we created, and we didn't do it just for us. We did it for the team, but it was definitely being used. So, thanks. So, other questions? I don't see any. Well, thank you very much. Well, thanks.